All right. Hello, friends. Today we are going to be talking about the orchestra. So, you guys have probably seen the orchestra before or a orchestra before. The orchestra is made out of four families of instruments. So, you got the strings, the brass, the woodwinds, and the percussions, which we already know. Those are the four main families of instruments. And in the orchestra, all four are playing at the same time. So at the front here, so this is a kind of like a picture of where everybody sits in the orchestra. So this is usually where the conductor stands. He's in front of everyone so that everybody can see him. Right at the front, we have the violins. Then we have the woodwinds. And then we have the brass right in here because they're usually pretty loud. And then, of course, the loudest of all the families is the percussion guys back here. And so they're placed at the back because they're loud. So, what you are hearing now is the brass section. The brass section includes instruments such as the French horn, the tuba, the trumpet, or the cornet. The cornet is kind of like a smaller version of the trumpet, and a trombone. You can also hear other instruments like the euphonium or the sousaphone, but these are kind of like the main instruments that you would see. All brass instruments are made of long pieces of kind of like twisted or coiled tubes of brass or other metals. Their sound comes from a musician's lips, so we will blow into kind of like the little thing right here. Okay. And you make a buzzing noise with your lips. So it kind of sounds like this. And that would be without the head here. So the sound coming out of a brass instrument can be changed whether or not your lips are tense or if they're kind of relaxed. So if they're super, super tense, then the sound goes higher. And if your lips are more relaxed, then the sound actually gets lower. So French horns are probably my favorite brass instrument. And they are the leaders of the brass section in the orchestra. So kind of like how you'll have like a team captain in sports, you also kind of have a team captain in the orchestra as well. And it just so happens that for the brass family or the brass section of the orchestra, the French horn is that team captain. Now, this is the trombone. It is another member of the brass family. It's made of long brass tubes that's kind of folded, kind of like a paperclip almost. And you play the trombone by sliding this little guy. Let's see if I can grab him. There it is. This little guy up and down and back and forth to make the tube longer or shorter. And this is the trumpet. The trumpet and the cornet belong to the brass family as well. So long ago, trumpets were actually used during like the military or like during battles. So soldiers would actually listen to the bugle boy, and the bugle boy, he would play different melodies, and the soldiers would actually recognize those melodies as meaning that they had to like change formation or do something else. So yeah, kings would also have trumpets play at the royal celebration because it made them sound important and special. These are the biggest brass instruments. This is the tuba. And the first tuba was actually made in Germany by a composer named Richard Wagner. And Wagner, we are actually going to be talking about in one of our composers of the month. It's going to be really, really fun. Okay, so now we're on to the percussion section. And the percussion section has like many, many different instruments, more than any other section. It's in the back of the orchestra because they are so loud, and they are consisting of instruments that you can hit, that you can scrape, that you can shake, that you can so many different things. It's something physical to make the sound. Okay. So this is probably the most common instrument that you will, or percussion instrument that you will see in the orchestra. And these are called the timpanis or the kettle drums or the bass drum. And these guys are snare drums. They all come in different sizes, but they are all kind of the same in one aspect. All of them have two heads. So the top head is played and the head underneath has little strips of metal stretched across it, which makes the kind of vibrating noise and the rattling sound that you hear. So when you hit the top head, those bottom metal pieces will actually rattle, causing that kind of cool, crisp rattling sound. And a snare drum you will actually find in a regular drum kit as well. Okay, these guys are also found in the percussion section, which you guys probably have seen. You guys have definitely seen the triangle. You've definitely seen the scraper. There's a variety of different scrapers here. This is a temple block. Like, you guys have probably played a lot of these instruments before. And they are called non-pitched percussion instruments because they don't actually have like a pitch to them. They just have a sound. Okay. So yeah, as I said, those percussion instruments were smaller, kind of handheld instruments. And it includes a whole lot of things. And even though they're very different from other percussion instruments and even from each other, you still play them by hitting them with a sounder or against each other. So a xylophone and a glockenspiel are actually tuned percussion instruments, so they actually have a pitch. And as I know that you guys have played the glockenspiel before, so you guys know that as you go higher, or as like the things that you hit get smaller, the sound gets higher, right? The marimba is very similar, except that it's a lot larger and deeper and more mellow sounding than the glockenspiel. It's quite a lovely sound, the marimba. And did you actually know that part of the percussion family is the piano? Because the piano has strings that actually are hit with a mallet. And because they're hit, that makes them a percussion instrument. Okay, so now we're on to the string section. And this has been probably the most, that's like your bread and butter of the orchestra. They've been around for like a really, really, really long time. String instruments has. They've been around for about 200 years, and they are the glue that holds the orchestra together. There are two types of stringed instruments, bowed and plucked. Now, bowed instruments can also be plucked, but plucked instruments cannot be bowed. Okay, so bowed strings are like the violin, the viola, the cello, and the bass, and plucked strings are like the harp, the guitar, the lute, the mandolin, the banjo, and a whole whack of others like the ukulele. Yeah, like those kind of things. Okay. And again, the violin, viola, cello, and bass, they can actually be plucked, but it's really hard to bow a guitar. It's not impossible, but it's not going to make a nice sound. So the biggest of the string instruments means that you have a lower sound. Kind of like with the glockenspiel, when you have like the bigger bars, that's the lowest sound, and then the tinier bars are the highest sound. This is very similar, okay? So the bigger the instrument, the lower the sound. This is called the double bass. Normally, like big orchestras will have 8 to 10 basses, but really, normally you'll only see about 2 or 3 in like normal sized orchestras. This is the cello. The cello is the second largest of the string section. Of all the strings, the rich singing sound of the cello makes it sound the most like a human voice, interestingly enough. And actually, did you know that all of the stringed instruments, actually all of the instruments except for percussion instruments, were made to try to replicate the human voice? Kind of cool, hey? Some people believe that the cello is the most expressive of the instruments. So in string quartets, so that's when you only have four different strings, uh, the cello usually plays the lowest notes, not the double bass. So we have the plucked strings, and that includes the harp, the guitar, the lute, the mandolin, and banjo. The harp is probably the one that you're going to see the most in orchestras, and then also maybe the lute if it's a Baroque orchestra. And we got a whole whack. Now, this is the viola. It looks very similar to a violin, and it's very, very hard to kind of tell just by look. However, it is slightly bigger than a violin, and it has a warmer and deeper tone than the violin. Okay. Oh no. Let me see where that was again. There we go. Okay. So now we're at the violin. The violin. Oh my goodness. Sorry, you guys. Okay. Okay. The violin is extremely important in the orchestra, even though it's the smallest of the string families. And actually, it is the violin that is like the team captain. Mm-hmm. So then we have our last family, which is the woodwinds. And a woodwind is an instrument that you blow into or over. Okay, so you have the flute, which is an instrument that you blow over the mouthpiece. Oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and saxophones, which you blow into. They are called woodwinds because they all used to be made out of woods. And they also because they have a reed. Usually. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why is the flute in the woodwinds? Well, it's because it actually used to be made out of wood. It wasn't until like more modern days that the flute kind of has grown into its metal body. So, the highest of the entire orchestra actually is the smaller cousin of the flute called the piccolo, and the lowest of the entire orchestra is also a woodwind instrument, and it's called the contrabassoon. Today they can be made of a whole whack of different materials. They can be made out of wood, metal, or plastic. So opening and closing of holes in the body of the instrument controls the pitch of the tones, much like a recorder. The bassoon is one of the lowest and the largest of the woodwinds. Its sound is low and warm, and honestly, I would say that the bassoon is probably my favorite of the woodwind instruments, just because it has such a warm sound. Then we have the clarinet. The clarinet is the most important in the woodwind orchestra because they are like the team captains. It has a very, very wide range, meaning that it can play super low notes and it can play super high notes as well. Flutes are actually like distant relatives of the recorder. They were once made out of wood, and most piccolos today are still made of wood. But today they can be made of all types of metal, including silver, gold, platinum, or a combination. Basically, if you have ever tried to blow into like over a bottle, like a bottle head, that's kind of the same way that you would play a flute. This is the oboe, and the oboe is the highest sounding of the woodwinds. So I don't know if you guys can see this right at the top here. That is a little strip of wood. And that is what is called a reed, and that is what causes the vibrations for the sound to actually happen in most woodwind instruments. So some of the woodwind instruments that use the reed are the clarinet, the oboe, the bassoon, and the contrabassoon. So the sound is produced much like the flute, which is basically like forcing a bunch of air to vibrate the reed. It's really, really cool. And it's a really, really hard instrument to play. The saxophone is not normally seen in the orchestra unless it is more of like a modern orchestra. It is still considered a woodwind because it's a reed instrument. It has very similar head to the clarinet. And it is very similar in kind of like the structure of the clarinet as well. Okay. So again, you probably won't see the saxophone very much in an orchestra unless it's a very modern orchestra. Okay, and that is all, my friends. I hope that you have an excellent rest of your day, and I will see you guys later. Bye.